Prepare to question everything you thought you knew. Welcome to the Pendulum Files, where history is reimagined and hidden truths come to light. Journey with us through time as we uncover the secrets and conspiracies that shaped our world. This is historical fiction like you've never heard before. Now step into the shadows of history where the past is not as it seems. The Pendulum Files, The Assassination of JFK, written by Charles Wallace. Welcome to the Pendulum Files, where history meets mystery. In this series, we explore pivotal events that have shaped our world, blending well-documented facts with compelling historical fiction. Through the lens of the pendulum, a shadowy organization rumored to have manipulated the course of history for centuries, we dive deep into the stories you thought you knew, revealing hidden agendas and unseen forces. Each episode uncovers the intricate web of intrigue behind major historical events, blurring the lines between reality and fiction. Join us as we reimagine history, weaving captivating narratives that entertain, educate, and provoke thought. This is the Pendulum Files, history as you've never heard it before. The following is a work of historical fiction. We have intentionally blended fictional components into the narrative. While the story includes real characters and events, it is not intended to be considered a historical account. Chapter 1. The Secret Meeting. Location: Washington, D.C., January 1963. In a dimly lit room in the heart of Washington, D.C., the core members of the Pendulum convened. The air was thick with smoke and anticipation. This group has been orchestrating the course of history for centuries, their reach extending back through the archives of time. Now they were plotting their latest move to ensure power and control. The room was filled with the shadowy figures of the pendulum: General Marcus Steele, a high-ranking military official disillusioned with democracy; Senator Richard Hawthorne, a pragmatic politician with deep elite connections; William Harrington, an industrial magnate driven by technological dominance; Cardinal Michael Donovan, a Catholic Church leader using fear for control. General Steele broke the silence. President Kennedy is becoming a problem. His handling of the Bay of Pigs invasion and his stance during the Cuban Missile Crisis have shown he's not aligned with our interests. He needs to be removed. Hawthorne nodded, his eyes glinting with ambition. We need a plan that ensures his death appears as the act of a lone madman. We must avoid any suspicion falling on us. Harrington leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Economic and technological stability is paramount. We must ensure that financial and technological power remains with us, controlling advancements and resources to our benefit. The common man is too short-sighted to understand what is necessary. Cardinal Donovan's voice was calm but firm. And we must not forget the moral and spiritual fabric of our society. The Church can provide the ethical guidance needed through fear and control to keep the masses in check. Steele stood, his presence commanding the room. We have the power to influence the course of history, but to do so we must eliminate those who stand in our way. President Kennedy's vision for the nation is at odds with our own. He must be removed. Hawthorne interjected, "We've already tried to leverage his affair with Marilyn Monroe, but even that hasn't been enough to sway him. He's proven more resilient than we anticipated." Senator Hawthorne added, his voice filled with conviction, "Our actions today will represent the swings of history and our control over its direction. Like a pendulum, we will dictate the timing and impact of each move, ensuring our dominance over time and the ticking clock of influence." The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but there was no mistaking the intense fervor in his eyes. "Lee Harvey Oswald," General Steele said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "We've been expecting you." Oswald removed his hat, revealing a determined expression. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I am prepared to do whatever it takes to preserve the order you envision. Kennedy's vision threatens the stability we aim to maintain. Senator Hawthorne gestured for Oswald to take a seat. We are in agreement, Mr. Oswald. Kennedy's death is necessary for the future we envision. But it must be executed with precision and secrecy. Do you understand? Oswald nodded, a grim resolve settling over his features. I understand. Consider it done. As the men outlined their plan, a sense of ominous determination filled the room. This was a crucial operation for the Pendulum, a secret society bound by their shared vision of control and manipulation. Their actions that night would set in motion a series of events that would shape the nation and the world for generations to come. Chapter 2. Tensions in Dallas, Texas, November 1963. Dallas was a city on edge. The political climate was charged, and President Kennedy's upcoming visit only heightened the tension. The president's progressive policies and stance on civil rights had polarized the city, with vocal supporters and fierce detractors alike. Sheriff Bill Decker, known for his staunch conservative views, had his own reservations about Kennedy's visit. The president is walking into a hornet's nest, Decker confided to his deputy. We need to ensure his safety, but I'm not sure how the people will react. Mayor Earl Cabell, a supporter of Kennedy, was determined to present Dallas as a welcoming city. We must show the nation that Dallas stands united behind our president, Cabell stated during a city council meeting. His optimism, however, was met with skepticism. Businessman Abraham Zapruder, an ardent Kennedy supporter, was planning to film the president's motorcade. This is history in the making, Zapruder told his assistant. I want to capture every moment. Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry, tasked with ensuring the president's safety, was under immense pressure. We need every available officer on duty, Curry ordered. No mistakes, this city cannot afford a tragedy on its hands. On the streets, conversations were fraught with tension. Kennedy's policies are ruining this country, one man argued at a local diner. He needs to go. Others were more hopeful. He's the change we need, a young woman countered. We must support him. Lee Harvey Oswald was a man of contradictions, feeling isolated and increasingly agitated. He worked at the Texas School Book Depository, his daily routine a cover for deeper, more sinister plans. Everything will change soon, Oswald muttered to himself, lost in thought as he handled the mundane tasks of his job. In the shadows, the Pendulum's operatives, Agents Blackwood and Drake, oversaw the preparations. Their presence was felt but not seen. We need to ensure everything goes according to plan, Blackwood instructed. Oswald thinks he's the lone shooter, but we have contingencies. Among the crowd gathering to see the president, another Pendulum operative, known only as the Umbrella Man, stood ready. His role was simple but crucial. Signal the exact moment to fire. He was an inconspicuous figure, holding an open umbrella despite the clear weather. This small act would ensure the shots were perfectly timed. As the visit drew closer, warnings and threats began to circulate. Letters were sent to the Dallas police, warning of potential violence. We must take every threat seriously, Chief Curry emphasized. The president's life depends on our vigilance. Back in Washington, Kennedy's advisors were apprehensive. Dallas is a hostile environment, one advisor warned. Are you sure this trip is necessary? Kennedy, ever confident, replied, We cannot shy away from challenging places. The people of Dallas need to see their president. The local media played a significant role in shaping public opinion. Headlines ranged from supportive to outright hostile. Kennedy, hero or villain? One newspaper queried. The polarized media landscape only added to the city's unease. The night before Kennedy's arrival, final preparations were made. Security was tightened, routes were planned, and key personnel briefed. Tomorrow is a big day, Mayor Cabell said to his team. Let's make sure it goes off without a hitch. The city of Dallas, a microcosm of the nation's division, was bracing itself for a day that would forever alter the course of history. Tensions ran high, and in the shadows, the pendulum waited, ready to set their plan into motion. Chapter 3. The Day of Reckoning. Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The morning of November 22, 1963, dawned bright and clear over Dallas. The city, buzzing with anticipation and tension, was about to witness a historic event. Crowds began gathering along the motorcade route early, eager to catch a glimpse of President John F. Kennedy and the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. In the Texas School Book Depository, Lee Harvey Oswald arrived for work, his demeanor calm but his mind racing. Today was the day he believed he would make history. "Everything depends on today," Oswald whispered to himself as he rode the elevator to the 6th floor. He glanced around the stacks of books, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Downtown, Abraham Zapruder set up his 8mm camera on a concrete pedestal along Elm Street. He adjusted the focus, ensuring he had a clear view of the motorcade route. "This is it," Zapruder told a bystander. "I'll get a perfect shot of the president." The Secret Service agents, led by Clint Hill, were on high alert. They positioned themselves strategically along the route, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. "Keep your eyes peeled," Hill instructed his team. "We can't afford any mistakes." As the motorcade approached Dealey Plaza, the atmosphere was electric. The President and First Lady waved to the adoring crowds, smiles on their faces. Jacqueline Kennedy, dressed in her iconic pink suit, radiated elegance and grace. Oswald took his position by the 6th-floor window, peering through the scope of his rifle. He steadied his breathing, focusing on the approaching motorcade. "This is for justice," Oswald muttered, convincing himself of the righteousness of his actions. From a concealed spot on the grassy knoll, Pendulum operatives Blackwood and Drake were also in position. They were the fail-safe, ensuring the mission's success if Oswald faltered. "Remember, Oswald thinks he's the lone shooter," Blackwood reminded Drake, "but we're here to make sure nothing goes wrong." Among the crowd, the Umbrella Man, another Pendulum operative, stood with his umbrella open, ready to signal the precise moment to fire. As the motorcade turned onto Elm Street, Zapruder began filming, capturing the joyous moment. He had no idea his footage would become one of the most scrutinized pieces of evidence in history. The president's limousine slowed as it turned the corner. The crowd's cheers were deafening, but the tension was palpable. As the motorcade drew closer, the anticipation reached its peak. The Pendulum operatives exchanged final terse nods. Oswald steadied himself, his finger resting on the trigger. The Umbrella Man readied his signal. The moment of reckoning was at hand, and the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Chapter 4. Crossfire. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The motorcade made its way slowly through Dealey Plaza, the crowds cheering and waving enthusiastically. President Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, beaming with smiles, waved back. In the midst of the excitement, the Pendulum operatives and Lee Harvey Oswald prepared to execute their plan. Abraham Zapruder steadied his camera, focusing on the approaching limousine. He was determined to capture the moment for posterity. From his perch on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, Oswald tracked the limousine through his scope. He exhaled slowly, calming his nerves. "This is it," he whispered. On the grassy knoll, Blackwood, acting as spotter, and Drake, the sniper, focused intently on the motorcade. The Umbrella Man, standing conspicuously among the spectators, waited for the perfect moment to raise his umbrella and signal the operatives to fire. The motorcade reached the designated spot. The Umbrella Man raised his umbrella. Oswald squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, and the plaza erupted in chaos. The bullet missed its mark, hitting the pavement. The crowd's cheers turned to screams. People ducked and sought cover, their faces contorted in fear and confusion. Zapruder, though shaken, continued filming, his camera capturing the chaos. He made a mental note of the direction of the shots, trying to steady his hand as the horror unfolded. Oswald adjusted his aim, his heart pounding. He fired again. This time, the bullet struck President Kennedy in the upper back, exiting through his throat. Kennedy's hands flew to his neck, his face a mask of pain and confusion. "Shots fired! Get down!" Secret Service agent Clint Hill shouted, leaping onto the back of the limousine to shield the President and First Lady. Jacqueline Kennedy, her face pale with shock, held her husband as he slumped forward. Blackwood saw the missed opportunity and knew it was time to act. He leaned closer to Drake and spoke calmly. "It's time. Wind at 10 o'clock, 5 miles per hour. Hold 2 mils left. Fire when ready." Oswald, hearing the commotion, took his third shot. This one struck Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of the president. Connally cried out in pain, twisting in his seat and collapsing. The bullet had entered his back, shattered 3 ribs, punctured his lung, and exited through his chest, shattering his wrist before embedding in his thigh. Drake, with Blackwood's steady guidance, lined up the fatal shot. Time seemed to freeze around him. He exhaled slowly, his focus narrowing to the president's head. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of his heartbeat in his ears. Every second stretched into an eternity as he steadied his aim. He squeezed the trigger. In slow motion, he watched the bullet leave the barrel, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The world moved in surreal slow motion as the bullet spiraled towards its target. Drake's eyes tracked its path, a sense of cold detachment settling over him. The bullet struck its mark with devastating accuracy, hitting Kennedy in the head. The impact was immediate and catastrophic, the president's head snapping back as blood and brain matter exploded into the air. Blackwood observed the scene unfold with an unnerving emotional detachment. "It's done," he murmured, his voice barely audible amid the ensuing pandemonium. Zapruder, though horrified, continued filming. He captured the president's final moments, his camera a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy. In the limo, Clint Hill desperately tried to shield the Kennedys. Jacqueline Kennedy, her pink suit stained with her husband's blood, reached out in a daze, trying to gather pieces of his shattered skull. Drake exhaled, the tension releasing from his body. He steadied himself, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Target neutralized," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of relief. Blackwood nodded, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. "Good work. Now, we move." As the motorcade sped away from Dealey Plaza, the echoes of the gunshots lingered in the air. The chaos and confusion were overwhelming, but the Pendulum operatives had ensured that their plan succeeded. Chapter 5. Race to Parkland, Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. As the fatal shot echoed through Dealey Plaza, the presidential limousine accelerated. Secret Service agent Clint Hill clung to the back of the car, shielding President Kennedy and the First Lady with his own body. "Get us to Parkland Hospital now!" Hill shouted to the driver, his voice filled with urgency. The driver pressed down on the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as they sped away from the chaos. Inside the limo, pandemonium reigned. Jacqueline Kennedy cradled her husband's shattered head, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Jack, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Governor John Connally lay slumped, moaning in pain. His wife, Nellie, tried to comfort him, pressing her handkerchief to his wounds. "Stay with me, John. We're almost there," she pleaded. Agent Roy Kellerman turned to Hill. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice tense. "It's bad, Roy. Real bad," Hill replied, his eyes scanning the road ahead, willing the hospital to come into view. Meanwhile, back in Dealey Plaza, chaos continued to unfold. Abraham Zapruder lowered his camera, his hands trembling. He had captured everything, the entire sequence of shots. But the reality of what he had filmed was beginning to sink in. "Dear God," he whispered. "What just happened?" Spectators screamed and ran in every direction, seeking cover and trying to comprehend the horror they had just witnessed. Police officers and Secret Service agents scrambled to secure the area, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. In the Texas School Book Depository, Lee Harvey Oswald slipped away amidst the confusion, leaving behind his rifle and his fate. He blended into the crowd, heading toward the nearest bus stop, unaware of the larger conspiracy at play. On the grassy knoll, Blackwood and Drake made sure no evidence would be left behind. "Mission complete," Blackwood said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Let's get out of here." Drake nodded, his face impassive. "Let's blend in with the crowd," he replied, melting into the crowd with practiced ease. As the presidential motorcade raced through the streets of Dallas, sirens blared and police motorcycles escorted the limo. The journey to Parkland Hospital seemed to stretch into eternity. Inside the car, the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the palpable tension of impending tragedy. "Hang on, Mr. President," Hill said, his voice filled with a desperate hope. "We're almost there." Jacqueline Kennedy, her pink suit soaked with blood, continued to hold her husband, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Jack, stay with me," she whispered, her words a fragile plea against the inevitability of what was happening. As they neared Parkland Hospital, the driver radioed ahead. "This is the presidential motorcade. We have a Code 3 emergency. Prepare for immediate trauma care." Doctors and nurses at Parkland scrambled into action, preparing the emergency room for the arrival of the wounded president. Gurneys were wheeled out and medical personnel stood ready, their faces a mix of determination and dread. Finally, the motorcade screeched to a halt in front of the hospital. Medical personnel rushed to the car, yanking open the doors and carefully lifting the president onto a stretcher. Jacqueline Kennedy, still clutching pieces of her husband's skull, followed closely, her steps unsteady but resolute. "Get him inside. Move, move, move," Hill shouted, guiding the medical team as they hurried through the emergency entrance. The hospital doors swung shut behind them, the world outside left in stunned silence as the race to save the president began. Chapter 6. Desperate Measures. Parkland Memorial Hospital, Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The emergency room doors flew open, and the medical team rushed President Kennedy inside. The ER was a whirlwind of activity as doctors and nurses scrambled to stabilize the gravely wounded president. "He's got a massive head wound and a wound to the throat," Dr. Malcolm Perry shouted as he assessed the president's injuries. "We need to get him into Trauma Room 1 now." Jacqueline Kennedy, her face pale and resolute, stood nearby, her eyes never leaving her husband. "Please, save him," she whispered to anyone who would listen. Nurse Doris Nelson quickly prepared the trauma room, setting up IV lines and readying the equipment. Another nurse, Nancy Miles, a Pendulum operative, moved through the chaos with a determined look. "We need blood," Dr. Perry called out. "Type O positive. Let's move, people." Doris handed the blood bag to Nancy. "I've never seen you before," she remarked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "I was just transferred," Nancy replied smoothly, taking the blood from Doris and heading toward the IV stand. In the confusion, she switched the bag with one she had concealed in her pocket, blood of a different type. Dr. Perry and Dr. Kemp Clark, the chief neurosurgeon, worked feverishly on President Kennedy. They inserted an endotracheal tube to help him breathe and prepared for an emergency tracheotomy. "Scalpel," Dr. Perry demanded, and a nurse handed him the instrument. He made a precise incision below the bullet wound in the president's throat and inserted the tube. "We need to get him oxygenated," he said, his voice tense but steady. As they began the transfusion, Kennedy's condition rapidly deteriorated. His heart rate plummeted, and his breathing became more labored. Dr. Perry looked at the monitors, puzzled. "What's happening? He's crashing." Nurse Nelson watched in horror as the president convulsed. "It's the blood," she gasped, realizing too late. "It's the wrong type." Nancy slipped out of the room, disappearing into the maze of hospital corridors. She had done her job. Now it was time to vanish. "We're losing him," Dr. Clark shouted. "We need to open his chest and massage his heart directly. Prepare for a thoracotomy." But even as they made the desperate attempt to save him, it was clear they were running out of time. The president's skin was pale, his pulse weak. Dr. Clark checked the president's pulse one last time before looking at the clock. "Time of death 1 p.m., he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. M.T. Jenkins, who had been managing the oxygen flow, gently pulled a white sheet over the president's face. Jacqueline Kennedy stood by, her hands clasped in front of her blood-stained suit, her eyes filled with tears that would not fall. Father Oscar Huber, a local priest, entered the room to administer the last rites. He approached Jacqueline Kennedy gently. "Mrs. Kennedy, may I?" Jacqueline nodded, her face a mask of sorrow. "Please, Father." Father Huber began the solemn prayer, his voice steady. "Si vivis, ego te absolvo a peccatis tuis, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen." The priest reached into his pocket and took out a small vial of holy oil. He put the oil on his right thumb and made a cross on President Kennedy's forehead. "Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord," he said softly, "and let perpetual light shine upon him." Jacqueline Kennedy responded, her voice breaking but firm. Father Huber continued to pray quietly as the medical team began to clean up, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a shroud. Nurse Doris Nelson glanced around the room, her eyes searching for the mysterious Nurse Nancy, but she was nowhere to be found. Outside, the nation was just beginning to learn of the tragedy. The airwaves filled with news bulletins, and a stunned silence fell over America. The president was dead, and the world would never be the same. Dr. Perry and Nurse Nelson walked out of the trauma room, their faces drawn and exhausted. "Who was that new nurse?" Doris whispered to Dr. Perry. "We need to find out who she was." Dr. Perry nodded, a grim resolve in his eyes. "We can discuss later, but first, we need to speak with the First Lady." They approached Jacqueline Kennedy, who stood like a statue in the hallway, her eyes fixed on some distant point. "Mrs. Kennedy," Dr. Perry said softly, "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." Jacqueline turned to him, her face a mask of grief. "Thank you, Doctor. I know you did." As she walked back into the trauma room to say her final goodbyes, Dr. Perry and Nurse Nelson exchanged a look. They had witnessed history, but they had also seen something far darker, a glimpse into a shadowy conspiracy that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Chapter 7. Aftermath. Dallas, Texas, November the 22nd, 1963. The news of President Kennedy's assassination spread like wildfire. Shock and grief engulfed the nation. In Dallas, the immediate aftermath was chaotic, with law enforcement agencies scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. Dallas Police Headquarters, Lee Harvey Oswald, apprehended and accused of the assassination, sat in an interrogation room. His face was a mix of defiance and fear. He knew he was a pawn, but he didn't realize the extent of the conspiracy. "You're in deep trouble, Oswald," the detective growled. "Do you understand what you've done?" Oswald insisted. "I'm a patsy. I wasn't alone. They've got me taking the fall." Carousel Club, Dallas, Texas. Jack Ruby, the owner of the Carousel Club, was in his office when the phone rang. He picked it up, his face growing pale as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Ruby, this is Blackwood. It's time. Oswald knows too much. He must be silenced." Ruby swallowed hard, the weight of what was being asked of him pressing down like a vice. "Are you sure about this?" Blackwood's voice was icy. "This is not a request. You know what happens if you refuse. Remember, your family will be taken care of." Ruby closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I understand. Blackwood continued. During the transfer, make sure everyone sees it. Air Force One, aboard Air Force One, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was preparing to be sworn in as the 36th President of the United States. The cabin was filled with a somber silence, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. Jacqueline Kennedy stood nearby, her face a mask of grief and shock, still wearing her blood-stained pink suit. Federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes arrived to administer the oath. As Johnson placed his hand on a hastily retrieved Bible, his eyes briefly met those of a man standing quietly in the background, a pendulum operative. The operative nodded subtly. Judge Hughes began. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. Johnson repeated the words, his voice steady despite the turmoil. As he concluded the oath, the pendulum operative's presence underscored the silent understanding between them. Parkland Hospital, back at Parkland, Dr. Malcolm Perry and Nurse Doris Nelson were still grappling with the events that had unfolded. The weight of what they had witnessed was almost too much to bear. Dr. Perry, we need to talk, Doris said, her voice filled with urgency. Perry looked at her, concern etched on his face. What is it, Doris? It's about that nurse, Nancy, Doris explained. I've checked the records and there's no Nancy Miles on staff. She must have switched the blood bags. She was an imposter. Perry's face paled. Are you sure? This is serious, Doris. We need to report this. Doris nodded. I know, but we have to be careful. Whoever she is, she's dangerous. Perry sighed, rubbing his temples. I'll make some calls. We need to find out who she is and who she's working for. Dallas Police Headquarters. On the morning of November 24th, Oswald was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. The basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters was packed with reporters and cameramen, eager to capture every moment. In the crowd, Jack Ruby waited, his heart pounding. He spotted Oswald being led by officers, and time seemed to slow. Ruby pushed through the crowd, his hand tightly gripping the revolver in his pocket. As Oswald came into view, Ruby stepped forward and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the basement, and pandemonium erupted. He's been shot! A reporter screamed, capturing the chaos on film. Officers quickly subdued Ruby, who offered no resistance. Oswald collapsed, clutching his stomach in pain. He was rushed to Parkland Hospital, where a team of medical personnel, including Dr. Tom Shires, worked frantically to save him. Despite their efforts, Oswald succumbed to his injuries within hours. Parkland Hospital. At Parkland, there was a brief commotion as the staff could not take him to Trauma Room 1, where JFK had been treated just 2 days earlier. It had been police taped off and considered a crime scene. He was instead taken to Trauma Room 2, but the sense of history repeating itself was palpable. Dr. Shires stood over Oswald's body, a grim look on his face. He's gone, he said quietly. Despite their efforts, Oswald was pronounced dead at 1:07 p.m. on November 24, 1963. Elsewhere at Parkland Hospital, Nurse Nelson approached Dr. Perry, her face filled with concern. Dr. Perry, we need to be careful. Considering all that has happened, and now with Oswald being killed, if what I suspect about Nancy is true, we could be in danger. Perry nodded, a determined look in his eyes. We'll find out the truth, Doris, but we need to be smart about it. There must be powerful people involved. As they walked out of the room, the reality of the conspiracy began to sink in. They had seen history unfold, but they had also glimpsed the dark forces at play. The pendulum's influence was vast, and the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. Air Force One, Washington, D.C. As Air Force One touched down in Washington, D.C., the nation braced for the turbulent times ahead. The pendulum's operatives had ensured that their plans were set in motion, but the questions and suspicions would linger for years to come. In the end, the assassination of President Kennedy was not just a tragedy for the nation, but a chilling reminder of the lengths to which those in the shadows would go to maintain their control. The Pendulum's work was far from over, and the ripple effects of that fateful day in Dallas would be felt for generations. Chapter 8. The Cover-Up. Parkland Hospital Parking Garage. Days after the assassination, Dr. Malcolm Perry and Nurse Doris Nelson walked towards their cars in the parking garage. The weight of the past events still hung heavily on their shoulders. "Doris, we need to be careful," Perry said, his voice filled with concern. "If what you suspect about Nancy is true, we could be in real danger." Before Doris could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows, Blackwood, his presence imposing and menacing. "Good evening, Dr. Perry, Nurse Nelson," Blackwood greeted, his voice calm but chilling. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." Perry stepped forward, anger flaring in his eyes. "Who are you? What do you want?" Blackwood's smile was cold. "Let's just say I represent certain interests. For your own safety and that of your families, you will let this go." Doris clutched Perry's arm, fear evident in her eyes. "You can't just threaten us." Blackwood's smile faded. "This isn't a threat, it's a promise. Forget this ever happened. Go back to your lives, speak out and you will regret it." As Blackwood disappeared back into the shadows, Perry and Doris stood in stunned silence, the weight of the conspiracy pressing heavily upon them. "Doris," Perry said finally, his voice low and tense, "I think it's best if you stop looking into this. We don't know who we're dealing with." Doris looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "But Dr. Perry, we can't just ignore this." "For our own safety, we have to," Perry insisted. "Promise me you'll let it go." Reluctantly, Doris nodded. "I promise." Dallas County Jail, Dallas, Texas. Jack Ruby sat on the edge of his cot, his thoughts racing. The cell door creaked open and Blackwood entered, his expression unreadable. "Ruby," Blackwood said, his tone authoritative, "we need to talk." Ruby looked up, his face a mixture of fear and defiance. "What do you want?" Blackwood pulled a chair closer and sat down, leaning in. "You've done your part by killing Oswald. Now you need to keep your mouth shut. Your family will be taken care of, but if you speak out, they'll suffer." Ruby's eyes widened. "You're threatening my family?" Blackwood's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained cold. "Think of it as an incentive to keep quiet. Just do as you're told, and everything will be fine." Ruby nodded slowly, the gravity of his situation sinking in. "I understand." Blackwood stood up, straightening his jacket. "Good. Remember, silence is golden." The Warren Commission Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Senator Richard Hawthorne and General Marcus Steele convened in an office, the air thick with tension. "We need to ensure the Commission's findings align with our narrative," Steele said, his tone resolute. Hawthorne nodded. "I've already spoken with Arlen Specter. He's crafting the single bullet theory to explain the trajectory of the shots. It will be controversial, but we have the evidence lined up." Steele looked satisfied. "Make sure Specter understands the importance of this. The public needs a simple, clear story." Hawthorne smirked. "Don't worry, he knows what's at stake." Unknown location, Washington, D.C. In a dark room, a projector flickered to life, displaying the infamous Zapruder film. The footage captured the fatal shots that struck President Kennedy, a key piece of evidence that could unravel the official narrative. Blackwood and another Pendulum operative watched intently. "This film could pose a problem," the operative said. Blackwood nodded. "Indeed, but we control its distribution. We'll release a sanitized version to the public. Any discrepancies can be explained away or discredited." The operative looked thoughtful. "And the original?" Blackwood's eyes darkened. "It will be kept under lock and key. Only a few trusted individuals will ever see the full footage. Various locations. Key witnesses and potential whistleblowers were systematically silenced. Some were discredited through orchestrated scandals, while others met with unfortunate accidents. The pendulum's influence was vast, its reach extending into every corner of the investigation. The official story took shape, a narrative carefully crafted to maintain their control. Washington, D.C., September 1964. The Warren Commission's final report was released to the public. It concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy, and that Jack Ruby had also acted alone in killing Oswald. The single bullet theory was presented as the official explanation for the wounds sustained by both President Kennedy and Governor Connally. Senator Richard Hawthorne and General Marcus Steele watched the news coverage with satisfaction. "The public will buy it," Steele said confidently. "We've ensured that all loose ends are tied up." Hawthorne nodded. "And the pendulum's influence remains intact." As the nation accepted the commission's findings, the true extent of the conspiracy remained buried. The pendulum had succeeded in shaping history to their will, their secrets safe for another generation. Chapter 9. Fact versus Fiction. In this chapter, we delve into the distinctions between the historical facts surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the fictional elements introduced in our narrative. This blend of reality and fiction is designed to spark curiosity and encourage further exploration of one of history's most scrutinized events. Characters, real and fictional, real characters. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, assassinated on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas. Jacqueline Kennedy, First Lady of the United States, wife of John F. Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald, accused assassin of President Kennedy, worked at the Texas School Book Depository. Clint Hill, Secret Service agent who leaped onto the back of the presidential limousine to shield the Kennedys. Abraham Zapruder, businessman who filmed the assassination of President Kennedy. Bill Decker, sheriff of Dallas County with conservative views. Earl Cabell, mayor of Dallas, a supporter of Kennedy. Jesse Curry, Dallas police chief tasked with ensuring Kennedy's safety. John Connally, Texas governor who was also wounded during the assassination. Nellie Connally, wife of Texas Governor John Connally. Malcolm Perry, doctor at Parkland Memorial Hospital who treated President Kennedy. Kemp Clark, chief neurosurgeon at Parkland Memorial Hospital who treated Kennedy. Tom Shires, chief of surgery at Parkland Memorial Hospital who treated Oswald. Jack Ruby, nightclub owner who killed Lee Harvey Oswald. J.D. Tippit, Dallas police officer allegedly killed by Oswald. Father Oscar Huber, priest who administered last rites to Kennedy. Lyndon B. Johnson, vice president at the time of the assassination, who was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One. Sarah T. Hughes, federal judge who administered the oath of office to Lyndon B. Johnson. Earl Warren, Chief Justice who led the Warren Commission investigating Kennedy's assassination. Arlen Specter, lawyer who helped develop the single bullet theory for the Warren Commission. M.T. Jenkins, doctor managing oxygen flow at Parkland Memorial Hospital during Kennedy's treatment. Doris Nelson, nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI at the time of Kennedy's assassination. Allen Dulles, former director of the CIA and a member of the Warren Commission. Roy Kellerman, Secret Service agent in Kennedy's limo. Louis Stephen Witt, Umbrella Man, a real person present at Dealey Plaza during the assassination, carrying an umbrella for personal reasons, not as part of a conspiracy. Fictional characters. The Pendulum, a shadowy organization manipulating historical events. Blackwood, a high-ranking pendulum operative and spotter during the assassination. Drake, a pendulum sniper who delivers the fatal headshot to Kennedy from the grassy knoll. Umbrella Man, in our narrative, portrayed as a pendulum operative, signaling the timing of the shots with his umbrella. Nancy Miles, a fictional pendulum operative posing as a nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital who sabotages Kennedy's treatment. Senator Richard Hawthorne, a Pendulum member involved in the conspiracy. General Marcus Steele, a high-ranking military official and Pendulum member involved in the assassination plot. William Harrington, an industrial magnate and Pendulum member driven by technological dominance. Cardinal Michael Donovan, a Catholic Church leader and Pendulum member using fear for control. Events, fact versus fiction. The assassination of JFK. Fact. Date and location. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. The shooting occurred as his motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza. Official lone gunman. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, firing from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, was the sole assassin. Fatal shots. Kennedy was struck by 2 bullets. The first entered his back and exited through his throat, and the second caused a fatal head wound. Fiction. The pendulum. The concept of the pendulum, a shadowy organization manipulating historical events, is entirely fictional. Multiple shooters. Our story introduces Blackwood and Drake as additional assassins, with Drake delivering the fatal headshot from the grassy knoll. This contrasts with the lone gunman theory upheld by the Warren Commission. Umbrella Man as operative. In our narrative, the Umbrella Man is portrayed as a pendulum operative, signaling the timing of the shots, adding a layer of conspiracy. The race to Parkland. Fact. Immediate response. After the shooting, the motorcade rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy cradled her husband's head, and Secret Service agent Clint Hill leaped onto the car to shield the Kennedys. Medical efforts. Upon arrival at Parkland, the medical team, including Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Kemp Clark, worked urgently to save President Kennedy. Fiction. Pendulum Nurse Nancy. The subplot involving Nurse Nancy Miles switching blood bags with incompatible blood to sabotage Kennedy's survival is fictional. This element adds a dramatic twist to the hospital scene. Doris Nelson's suspicions. While the characters of Doris Nelson and Dr. Perry are real, the inclusion of a suspicious nurse working for the pendulum is a creative addition. Oswald's arrest and death. Fact. Arrest. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested later on the day of the assassination, initially for the murder of police officer J.D. Tippit. Murder by Jack Ruby. 2 days after Kennedy's assassination, Oswald was shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby in the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters. This event was broadcast live on television. Fiction. Blackwood's role. In our narrative, Agent Blackwood contacts Jack Ruby, urging him to silence Oswald. This conversation and Blackwood's involvement are entirely fictional, adding a layer of orchestrated conspiracy. Oswald's last words. The portrayal of Oswald claiming he wasn't alone and was being set up is based on various conspiracy theories, but is dramatized for narrative effect. The Warren Commission, fact establishment. The Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, was established to investigate the assassination. The final report, released in 1964, concluded that Oswald acted alone. Single bullet theory. The Commission's report included the single bullet theory, suggesting that one bullet caused multiple wounds to both Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally. Fiction. Pendulum's influence. Our story portrays the pendulum manipulating the Commission's findings to ensure the official narrative aligns with their agenda. The inclusion of characters like Senator Richard Hawthorne and General Marcus Steele influencing the investigation is a fictional twist. Control of Zapruder film. While the Zapruder film is real and critical to the investigation, our narrative's depiction of the pendulum controlling its distribution and sanitizing the footage adds a layer of intrigue and secrecy. The aftermath and cover-up. Fact, public reaction. The nation was plunged into mourning following Kennedy's assassination, and numerous conspiracy theories emerged over the years. Controversies. The events surrounding the assassination, including Oswald's death and the findings of the Warren Commission, have been subjects of debate and speculation for decades. Fiction. Conspiracy and silencing. The narrative introduces a series of orchestrated events, including the systematic silencing of witnesses and potential whistleblowers by the pendulum. This element heightens the sense of a pervasive and powerful conspiracy. Conclusion. By blending historical facts with fictional elements, the Pendulum Files aims to engage listeners and spark curiosity about one of the most significant events in American history. Through the lens of historical fiction, we explore the complexities and mysteries surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy, encouraging a deeper investigation and understanding of history. Chapter 10. Closing Thoughts. As we navigate the blurred lines between fact and fiction, it's essential to recognize that while our narrative introduces imaginative elements, it is grounded in real historical events. The Pendulum Files serves as a lens through which we explore the what-ifs of history, inviting you to question and ponder the possibilities. Encouraging curiosity. Our goal is to ignite curiosity and encourage further exploration of the events surrounding President Kennedy's assassination. The blend of historical facts and fictional conspiracy theories provides a compelling narrative that challenges readers to distinguish between documented history and creative storytelling. Educational value. For younger audiences, understanding the facts behind the assassination is crucial. Learning about the Warren Commission, the Zapruder film, and the historical context helps build a foundation of knowledge. By juxtaposing these facts with fictional elements, we aim to make history engaging and thought-provoking. Invitation to explore. We encourage readers to delve deeper into the historical facts, explore different perspectives, and critically analyze the events of November 22, 1963. Numerous books, documentaries, and archival materials are available for those interested in uncovering the truths and myths surrounding one of the most pivotal moments in American history. Tune in for the next episode and ask yourself, is everything as it seems, or are we all pawns in the game of history?